from the tribulation period pass into the 1,000-year reign here, they have children who become the nations, and the nations are become unbelievers. And at the very end of the 1,000-year reign, Satan is released from the bottomless pit, and he deceives the nation. Well, if the rapture happens anytime during this tribulation period, they're caught up to heaven. In the rapture, there's no believers to have children to become the nations to be deceived by Satan. The only way it could happen is if the rapture happens first, and then there's believers that come to Christ during the tribulation period by the 144,000 Jewish evangelists, which we've talked about in other Bible studies, which is covered in Revelation chapter 7. I mean, it's a lot of information, and it can be bogged down. If anybody wants more information, I've actually got previous Bible studies up on my YouTube channel, and you can watch it there as well. So okay. So, again, whenever, and this is something we've been covering consistently through our Bible studies, is that whenever we look at symbols in the book of Revelation, it can get really confusing. And I tell people, please don't study the book of Revelation first if you're a new Christian, or even if you've been a Christian for a while. Read the rest of the Bible first. You get a really good teachers that are much better than I am, and study that first, Old and New Testament, and then tackle the book of Revelation. And even then it's difficult. Because, as we've seen consistently, the Apostle John is constantly drawing from books from the Old and New Testament. He's drawing from Moses. He's drawn from Elijah. He's drawn from Zechariah. He's drawn from Jeremiah. And he's doing no differently here. So, if you have a Pew Bible, we're going to go to the book of Zechariah chapter 4. It's the big white tab that's there. It's page 671 in your Pew Bible. We're going to go to Zechariah chapter 4. It's the second to the last book of the Old Testament. It's in between Haggai and Malachi. So we're going to go to Zechariah chapter 4, and we're going to start with verse 1. Okay, Zechariah, chapter 4, verse 1. Make sure everybody's there first. Okay, Zechariah chapter 4, verse 1. And the angel who is speaking with me returned and roused me, as a man who is awakened from his sleep. This is Zechariah writing. He said to me, "Who do you see?" And I, meaning Zechariah, said, "I see and behold a lampstand, all of gold, with its bowl on the top of it, and its 7 lamps on it, with 7 spouts belonging to each of the lamps which are on the top of it. Also 2 olive trees by it, one on the right side and of the bowl, and the other on the left side." Then I said to the angel who was speaking with me, saying, "What are these, my Lord?" So the angel who was speaking with me answered and said to me, "Do you not know who these are?" And I said, "No, my Lord." Then he said to me, "This is the word of the Lord to Zerubbabel, saying, Not by might nor by power, but by my Spirit, says the Lord of hosts." And if you remember, I had said earlier that olive trees represent those who are filled with the Spirit, or the oil. So drop down to verse 11. Then I said to him, "What are these 2 olive trees on the right of the lampstand and on his left?" And I answered the second time and said to him, "What are the 2 olive branches which are beside the 2 golden pipes which empty the golden oil from themselves?" So he answered me, saying, "Do you not know what these are?" And I said, "No, my Lord." So I can see where he's getting kind of frustrated with them. In a way, the angel's kind of playing with him a little bit. Verse 14. Then he said, "These are the 2 anointed ones who are standing by the Lord of the whole earth." So this is who these 2 witnesses are. These 2 witnesses are those who are standing by the Lord for the whole earth. So he's drawing from this terminology and the symbolism that's going on. And if we were to read Zechariah chapter 3 and Zechariah chapter 4, the 2 individuals that he's talking about that stand before the Lord is a man named Joshua. Now, this is not Joshua, who is the successor of Moses way back in the book of Joshua. This is a different Joshua. He was a priest. And the other individual he's talking about is Zerubbabel. Now, I'm not implying that Joshua and Zerubbabel are going to come back to life and there's going to be the 2 witnesses. What John is talking about is it's going to be 2 prophets who are like Joshua and Zerubbabel, who will stand before the Lord over the whole earth in the same way Joshua and Zerubbabel did. And the question is, okay, who are going to be these? Who are these two witnesses? Well, we're gonna get to that. So because we have to build this up. In verse 5, if you notice, it says that fire flows out of the mouth. And some people think, well, this is just symbolized. It might talk about something intense like fire, but if you actually look in the Greek, it literally means literal fire. And it says that it flows, it projectile. It's sort of like I'm in the nursing profession, and someone has projectile vomiting, it just kind of spews out. Sort of like if anybody has seen The Exorcist, sort of like when the pea soup comes out of their mouth. Well, imagine this being fire that's coming out. It's literal fire that's coming out, and it's actually devouring, these individuals. It's the same word that is actually used when it says John ate a little book, but in here, the word devour can have numerous meanings. It means to eat, to consume, to destroy, or kill. In this particular passage, it literally means the fire is coming out of their mouth, and anybody who tries to attack him, he's going to kill them. He's literally devouring them with fire. And because it goes on to say that it will harm them or devour them or to kill them. And these and in verse 6, it says that they have certain miraculous gifts. They have the power to shut up the sky so that rain will not fall during the days of their prophesying. They have power over the waters to turn them into blood and to strike the earth with every plague as often as they desire. Now, as we've been studying throughout this entire book so far, whenever John is writing something, 9 times out of 10, he's borrowing language from the Old Testament. And as we know, when it comes to the Bible, things tend to repeat themselves. Events tend to repeat themselves. Now, if you ever heard of Dr. David Jeremiah, he's on television. He's a pastor that's out of California. His father actually used to be the head pastor at Emmanuel Baptistry here in Toledo. And now he's got this huge ministry. And even though what he writes is not inspired, only Scripture is inspired, I thought I was actually read through it because he's actually got some information on the two witnesses. And I was just going to share a little bit, but honestly, the whole thing is worth reading. So just kind of sit back and relax, and I'm just going to read basically what he said. He said, most people believe that most of the witnesses is Elijah. One of the witnesses is Elijah the prophet. Here are their reasons. 1. Malachi the prophet predicted that Elijah would come before the second advent to prepare the way of Messiah. And this is a quote from Malachi. Behold, I, the Lord, will send you Elijah the prophet before the coming of the great and dreadful day of the Lord. The great and dreadful day of the Lord is what we're talking about right now, right before Jesus comes and ushers in his second coming or his second advent. And he will turn the hearts of the fathers to the children, and the hearts of the children to their fathers, lest I come and strike the earth with a curse. Some think that John the Baptist completely fulfilled Malachi's prophecy. But although John came in the spirit and power of Elijah, Luke chapter 1, verse 17, meaning that the spirit that filled and enabled Elijah also filled and enabled John the Baptist, John was not a reincarnation of the Old Testament prophet. In fact, a group of Jews investigating John specifically asked him if he was Elijah. His response was an emphatic, I am not. John chapter 1, verse 21. Thus, John was not the fulfillment of Malachi's prophecy. In other words, he came in the power and spirit of Elijah, but he was not the actual person of Elijah that Malachi was talking about. So Elijah will return at some time before Jesus comes back. He has not come back yet. So he has to come back at some point, in order to fulfill that prophecy. Number 2, Elijah was miraculously taken up into heaven, just as the two witnesses will be. Number 3, the witnesses will have the same power to withhold rain as Elijah did. 4, Elijah called down fire from heaven, as will the two witnesses. In fact, Elijah was the only prophet in the entire Old Testament who God gave the power to pull fire down from heaven. Even Moses didn't have that power. And number 5, the duration of both the drought in Elijah's day and the ministry of the two witnesses is exactly 3 years and 6 months. Some think the second witness is Enoch, because someone brought up about Enoch. But I, referring to David Jeremiah, not me, I believe Moses is the more likely conclusion for the following reasons.
He's not my favorite anymore.
Huh?
He's not my favorite.
Yeah, he's your favorite. You like David Jeremiah, so... Okay. Number 1, Moses appeared with Elijah at the transfiguration of Christ. Number 2, God gave Moses the ability to turn water into blood, and the witnesses will be given that same power. Number 3, God preserved Moses' body so that he might be restored. The bodies of the witnesses will be restored as well. Number 4, Satan contended with Michael the archangel for the body of Moses. It's possible that in doing so he was trying to hinder God's plan for the last days. And number 5, Moses and Elijah stand for the law and the prophets. Since the ministry of the witnesses will occur within the Jewish nation, it makes sense that representatives of the law, Moses, and the prophets, Elijah, would appear to the Jews. Timothy Demi and John Whitcomb make a strong case for why Elijah and Moses are the witnesses described in Revelation 11. This is the last part. No two men in Israel's entire history would receive greater respect and appreciation than Moses and Elijah. Moses was God's great deliverer and lawgiver for Israel. First century Jews actually thought that Moses had given them the manna in the wilderness. And God raised up Elijah to confront Israel in a time of great national apostasy. God vindicated him by sending fire from heaven and a chariot of fire and horses of fire to escort him out of this world. So highly did the Jews of Jesus' day think of Elijah that when they saw Jesus' miracles, some people concluded that Elijah had returned. In Matthew chapter 16, he says, "Who do people say that I am?" And one of the prophets they thought they was, he says, "Some people think you're Elijah," because they were expecting him to come back. So again, we can't be dogmatic about it, but like it says, Elijah has to come back at some time. There are many Jews that believe that Moses was going to return at some time, because if you read the end of the book of Deuteronomy, when Moses dies, it said that his eyes had not deteriorated, even though he was 120 years old. His body was still intact. He just died, basically, of old age. Let's see, and I think that's pretty much it there. Mention about why not John the Baptist and why not Enoch. So, comments before we get into the next verse. Comments or questions? Okay, if we go to verse 7, he says, when they finished their testimony after 3.5 years, so this is at the end of the tribulation period, it says, the beast that comes out of the abyss will make war with them and overcome them and kill them, referring to the two witnesses. The word beast comes from the Greek word therion, and it literally means brutal, ferocious, venomous, savage. This is an individual you don't want to mess with. You don't want to be on his bad side, but you also don't want to be on his good side either. He is the most evil individual that has ever lived and ever will live. The word beast is used in Mark's gospel when this says that Jesus was in the wilderness with Satan and the wild beasts. In Genesis 3, it says the serpent was more crafty than any beast of the field. And as we're going to talk about in future Bible studies, this serpent in the Garden of Eden was Satan, because John identifies the serpent as Satan. Paul describes the Cretan prophets as evil beasts. And in Revelation chapter 13, the same beast is referred to in John's second epistle as the Antichrist that makes war with the saints. And it says he comes out of the abyss. Other translations say bottomless pit. They're synonymous. And it literally demonstrates that this power is satanic that he actually has. That's why he says it comes out of the abyss. It's where Satan is thrown into at the end of the tribulation period. The beast of the sea and the false prophet get thrown into the lake of fire, which is hell, but Satan gets thrown into this bottomless pit. So when it says this beast that comes from the abyss, you know the guy is satanic. He's basically satanically possessed. And it says he will kill the two witnesses. Now in verse 8 it says that their dead bodies, these two witnesses, will lie in the street after they kill them, which mystically is called Sodom and Egypt, where the Lord was crucified. It says lies in the great city. We know that this great city is the city of Jerusalem, because back in Daniel chapter 9, which John is drawing from, the holy city, he identifies it as Jerusalem. The reason why he says Sodom and Egypt, because Sodom, as we know from the Old Testament, was a place of pride, indulgentness, careless ease, and prosperousness, and they were indifferent to the needs of others. They were very self-absorbed, and as we can see in the world today, most people, including a lot of carnal Christians, are very self-absorbed. It's all about them. It's not about God. It's not about Jesus. And when you come to Christ, you begin not living your life for yourself anymore. You start living your life for Him, because because our will is supposed to be the will of God. Because even Jesus said, I did not come here for my will, but for the will of him who sent me. And the reason it's called Egypt is because Egypt was a city of idolatry, or a country of idolatry, persecution, and people who were enslaved to their sin and righteousness. Everybody in the earth, including us, is a slave to something. We're either a slave to sin or we're a slave to Christ. There is no third option. And unfortunately, many translations refer to us as being servants. But the Greek word doulos that's used in the New Testament is better translated slave. And the difference is a servant can do a job and quit anytime they want. Slave is owned. And we are slaves of Christ because he bought us with his precious shed holy blood on the cross. So we are a slave of Christ rather than a slave of sin when he rescues us out from the world. And it says that they were not allowed to be buried. This was actually an act of dishonor and contempt, because the Old Testament actually commands people that if someone dies, you are to bury them. And because they're just letting them rot, or thinking they're just going to let them rot in the street, it was actually an act of dishonor and contempt towards them. In fact, in Book of Acts, chapter 14, Paul was left to be dead in the street when they stoned him. And it says where the Lord was crucified. And notice it says mystically and spiritually is this great city, because we know that he was crucified in Jerusalem. And the Apostle John, who wrote the book of Revelation, also wrote the Gospel according to John. And the disciple that was at the cross was the Apostle John. So if anybody knew where Jesus was crucified, it would have been John. And the same person wrote both books, and he was, as we know, he was crucified in Jerusalem. But during this period of time, John is comparing Jerusalem to being no better than Sodom and Egypt. He tries to use two of the worst examples in Jewish history. And in verse 9, it says that they're going to be laying there for 3.5 days. They won't permit them to bury them. And in verse 10, which I think is probably one of the most despicable verses in the whole chapter, it says, those who dwell on the earth rejoiced over them and celebrated, and they even sent gifts to one another as if it's a holiday, like it's Christmas or something. And the reason they're doing that is because the two prophets had tormented them to those who dwell on the earth. Notice how he refers to dwell on the earth. Those who dwell on the earth is a synonym for unbelievers. So these unbelievers who dwell on the earth are celebrating. And if they got cell phones at that point, they'll probably be taking pictures with them.
So he tormented them with what? The gospel and prophecy?
Yes, with the gospel, with prophecy. And they even tormented them with fire, the fire that comes out of them. So they're tormenting.
So if they tried to hurt him?
Yeah. So and then what it was, they were trying to hurt the two witnesses, and the witnesses spewed fire out them and killed them.
Wow.
So imagine you're an unbeliever during a tribulation period, and you're trying to go after one of these two witnesses, and they kill you, and then an unbelieving family member of yours sees this. They're going to be celebrating when these two witnesses die, even though they were trying to warn you and your family members about the coming judgment. But their hearts are going to be so hard, it's going to be worse than when Pharaoh in the Old Testament, when his heart was hardened. And in fact, the Bible even says that God even hardened his heart even more. So a good question. So he was tormented, and the word for tormented can mean torture. And it comes from a word that signifies a black stone used to test the purity of gold and silver by rubbing on it. And when you rub on it, if it's fake, it tears away, physically tears away, from the surface of it. So it's trying to indicate that it's going to cause pain, both physical and spiritual pain, as far as the torment that these prophets are tormenting with them. And those that are being tormented are those who will take the mark of the beast. And the word for torment refers to those that when they take the mark of the beast, they're going to be tormented day and night, in the fires of hell. And in Revelation chapter 20, it says the devil, the Antichrist, and the false prophet will also be tormented day and night as the smoke goes up from the lake of fire. But again, he says they rejoice, they celebrate, and they send gifts to one another. This just shows the depraved mind that people are going to have during this time. People who have not come to Christ, they have that same type of mind. In fact, all of us did before we gave our lives over to Christ. And it wasn't because of anything or decision we made. It was because God was merciful, and he changed our heart of stone into a heart of flesh, and he rescued us out of the world. But if he hadn't done that, we wouldn't have been any different. And yet, as hard-hearted as the world is right now, it's going to be astronomically worse during this period of time, because two genuine prophets of God, and even if they are Moses and Elijah, they're not going to care. Even if they're Jewish unbelievers, they're still going to celebrate Moses and Elijah if it's them, that they had died, and they're going to be celebrating. That's a type of depraved mind it is. But then in verse 11, it says that after 3.5 days, the breath of life from God came into him. The word breath of life is the same type of word that's used in Genesis chapter 2 when it says that God breathed life into Adam. And when it talks about all the creatures of the earth that had the breath of life in them right before the flood took place. In other words, he's bringing them back to life. God is miraculously bringing these two witnesses back to life. And it said that the people looked on it in fear. The Greek word for fear, I don't think it's up here, but it's where we get our word phobia from. And it literally means to strike terror, to be alarmed, to be affrighted. It doesn't just mean that they were afraid. They were scared to the point of not being able to move. I mean, they were terrified when they saw this, because they saw the hand of God. And then in verse 12 it says that a loud voice came from heaven. And it's two Greek words, megos and phone. It's where we get our English word megaphone from. So a loud voice that everyone is going to be able to hear comes down from heaven. It's the same two Greek words that Jesus uses in John chapter 11 when it says that he yelled with a loud voice and said, "Lazarus, come out," and came out from the grave. And when Jesus is on the cross and he yells with a loud voice, my God, why have you forsaken me?" It's that same type of loud voice everybody's going to hear. And then it says, "Come up here." It literally means ascend. And it's the same word that's used in Acts chapter 2 when Jesus is with the 12 disciples for 40 days after he rises from the dead, and then he ascends to heaven. He literally came up to heaven. But this is not the rapture, and this is where people think that this is talking about the rapture of the church. It's not, and I'll explain the reason why it's not the rapture. But it says that he went to heaven in a cloud, same word for cloud that's used at the transfiguration of Jesus. But the key word is it says that their enemies watched them. This is why it's not the rapture. Because if we were, you don't have to go here, but if we were to go back into 1 Corinthians chapter 15, where the Apostle Paul is talking about the rapture, in verses 51 and 52 it says, "Behold, I tell you a mystery. We will not all sleep, but we will all be changed. In a moment, in the twinkling of an eye, at the last trumpet. For the trumpet will sound, and the dead will be raised imperishable, and we will be changed." Okay? The twinkling of an eye is literally the amount of time it takes for light to bounce off the eye at 186,000 miles per second. In other words, it's going to be instantaneous that this is going to happen. This is when the rapture happens. In other words, when the rapture takes place of the church, no one's going to see it. It's going to be a twinkling in an eye. It's going to be instantaneous. No one's going to see it. But in this passage, it says that everybody's going to see it. Everybody that's around is going to see them go up into heaven. So this can't be the rapture, because the rapture nobody sees. It's instantaneous. And it talks about this last trumpet. Again, this cannot refer to the seventh trumpet here, because this event happens after 3.5 years. So to kind of visualize it, it happens like around this period of time, after the bowl judgments. So because this whole period of time that's happening, it doesn't conclude at the end of the sixth trumpet. It actually takes place during the rest of the tribulation period, and then when they're actually caught up to heaven, these two witnesses, it happens here. It does not happen here at the seventh trumpet, because some people think, well, this is the seventh trumpet judgment that they come up. It doesn't. It happens much later. That's another reason why this can't be the rapture, and it's not, talking about that. So, and then in verse 13, it talks about a great earthquake. Again, here's more calamity. We had talked earlier about there being two earthquakes that took place. Well, there's going to be a third earthquake, and a tenth of the city is going to fall. This is in verse 13. And 7,000 people just within the city of Jerusalem are going to be killed. And it says that they were terrified. It literally means trembled. It's the same word that's used in Luke chapter 24 when the apostles saw Jesus walk on the water and they thought that they saw a ghost. Well, actually, no, in Luke 24, after Jesus rose from the dead, because they thought he was dead and he wasn't coming back and they see him. And it says that the apostles thought he was a ghost. So it was that same type of trembling. And then it says in verse 13 that the people who dwelled on the earth gave glory to God. It doesn't mean that they praised him. It means that they had grudgingly admitted that it was God's power that did this. Because remember, they're trembling. They're afraid. But they're even seeing these witnesses that the Antichrist killed being brought to life and being caught up into heaven, ascending into heaven. They're still not coming to Christ. They're seeing the miracles of God happening, and they're still not believing. And then in verse 14 it says, the second woe is past, behold, the third woe is coming. Now the word woe, it doesn't translate very well into English. It can sometimes be translated alas, but it refers to an exclamation of extreme grief and agony, basically. And the Apostle John uses this 3 times in the book of Revelation. He refers to the first woe as the first trumpet judgment in Revelation 9, the second woe in Revelation 11, because he says the second woe is coming. And then in Revelation 8, it talks about the third woe, or the 7th trumpet. So the 3 woes that are talking about in the book of Revelation, these 3 exclamations, are talking about these 3 trumpet judgments, because as bad as the seal judgments were, the 7 trumpet judgments are worse. And we're going to be getting into the worst time of human history during the time of the Antichrist, where the bowl judgments take place after the Antichrist is revealed. So, and again, like I said, the events that we're talking about, although they begin between the 6th and 7th trumpet judgments, they don't end at the 7th trumpet judgment. They extend for the rest of the tribulation period, because he says that the witnessing of the 2 witnesses extends for 1,260 days, or 42 months, or 3.5 years. So although the book of Revelation is done chronologically with the seal, trumpet, and bowl judgments, they do overlap in a little bit particularly in those events where it talks about what happens throughout the tribulation period. But they don't happen simultaneously, because the Bible says the seal judgments 1, 2, 3, 4, up to 7 happen, and then the 7th seal activates the trumpet judgments. And then the 7th trumpet judgments activate the bowl judgments. So that's how we know that it's chronological, with certain exceptions. So, is there any comments or questions about anything that we've covered? I know it's a lot of information. Okay, the Ben.
Okay, so is the bottomless pit that this beast came out of the same bottomless pit that Abaddon the locust came out of?
Yep.
Okay.
Yep, and it's the same bottomless pit that Satan is going to be thrown back into by Jesus when he returns at the very end. Yep, and the whole concept is the fact this bottomless pit is satanic and evil. So yep. So for our next Bible study, we're going to be talking about the 7th trumpet, and we're going to explain a little bit more why this is not talking about the rapture when the trump of God sounds, and we're going to explain a little bit, the reason why. Talk a little bit about the temple of God that's in heaven, what's that all about, and if we have time, we're going to get into Revelation chapter 12, because the rest of the chapter is only 5 verses, and if we have a chance to get into it, we're even going to possibly talk about who this woman is in Revelation chapter 12 that is adorned with the sun, the moon, and 12 stars, because it's not who a lot of people think it is. And
Say Israel.
And who is the dragon who chases her into the wilderness, and when this happens.